Welcome to the Modco podcast. Conversations about life, organization, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. This show was created to provide motivation, inspiration, and a reminder to give yourself grace. Here, we are transparent, non-judgmental, authentic, and love to have fun because sometimes you need to laugh at yourself. I'm your host, Angel. Sit back and get ready for valuable tips, resources, laughs, and more. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been hanging around for a while, welcome back. And I hope you brought a friend.
Welcome to another awesome and exciting episode of the Marco podcast. Be sure to grab some food and drinks and just chillax.
Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to share some exciting news with you all. I am chatting with Coach Ellyn today, and I'll give you all the details about her in a little bit. But Coach Ellyn and I have come together and we have created the Podcast Hub. It is a no spam, no fluff, just real connection space for podcasters to connect, to find a guest and to be a guest. We just launched it on Monday. We already have some members in there and we are super excited. So if it is something that interests you, if you would like to learn more about it, you can click on the link in the show notes and find out more about the Podcast Hub. We are currently offering an early bird special. So the first 50 members will get in at $5 a month or $50 for the year. If you join after we get 50 members, then the price goes up to $10 per month. So go ahead, click that link in the show notes and check it out. All right, let's dive into this episode. Coach Ellyn is a former research scientist turned the #1 burnout and stress management coach on Google, creator of the Burnout Proof Business Program and host of the Burnout Proof podcast. She has been featured in Fast Company, the New York Times, and On Stage with LinkedIn. Coach Ellyn teaches individuals and organizations how to create sustainable success through mindset, systems, and self-care so they can do what they love and love how they do it. Burnout Proof. Everyone, let's welcome Coach Ellyn to the show. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Heck yeah, I'm pumped to be here. And I'm
Yes.
caffeinating simultaneously because it's early as we record this for me.
Yeah, I am caffeinating myself as well here. So I went out to breakfast with a friend of mine this morning. We were supposed to do it earlier this week, but she was like, oh, she needed to reschedule. And I was like, okay. So I was like, well, I have to be at home by 11 because I have a podcast that I have to record. She's like, okay.
You've
So we
had
went
way
to
more of a day than I have already. And I love that. You're like working hard, playing hard all at the same time, which I feel like is
but
how it should be.
listen, I got mad at her because we were supposed to meet right after we did drop off. Our kids go to the same school, which is how we met.
Yeah.
And so my husband actually did drop off this morning. I was like, okay, cool. I'll get like a little bit of extra sleep. I was like, right after drop off, probably about 8 o'clock ish, maybe 8:15. I can sleep just like a little bit later. As I'm getting out the shower, she texts me. She's like, it's probably going to be more like 8:45-ish before I get there. I had to run back home. I was like, I'm so mad at you right now because I could have slept for an extra 30 minutes. Like that's 30 minutes
Sleep
of
is
my
precious.
sleep. Right. It was 30 minutes of my sleep that you took away from me. I was like, I have to come back
That's
after
too
breakfast,
funny.
record podcast, then go get teacher gifts, then go to my son's school because they're having some kind of program or something like that, and then go to
Yeah.
work. I was like, 30 minutes of
Yup.
sleep lost. So I'm
Yep.
caffeinating myself over here as well. So you're not alone.
Oh
Well,
man, we really did nail it when we said besties by the end of the week for sure.
we did. So Ellen and I are going to be seeing a lot of each other this week. We have like another recording to do. We have a coffee chat. We have a lot going on this week, and I think we're
Yes.
seeing each other probably like every day of the week. So it's going to be
Yes.
fun.
It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. But yeah, let's
Well,
dive in.
let's do it. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we get started?
And whenever I talk about this topic and whenever I talk about burnout, I always personally tend to like to throw it back a little bit. Like, yeah, like it's kind of fun to give context now, but I always like to throw it back to like where things started for me. Because I'm a big believer that when it comes to like burnout, for example, a lot of the habits and behaviors and mindsets that lead us to burnout as adults are actually formed when we are younger. I actually think they're formed when we are teenagers. So like if I think back to high school, Ellen, I was very externally validated. I was very much like the busy is a badge of honor kind of person. Like I feel like I did a lot of things and I made a lot of choices and I made a lot of decisions about like the activities that I was going to engage in based on like give me the gold star. Like, just tell me I'm doing a
Mhm.
good job. That is kind of why I became the person I became. Like, I kept operating like that. I feel like we all had a point in our lives where the ways in which we operated when we were younger no longer work. And for me, that was graduate school. Like, I hit this wall during graduate school of doing things for the gold star and doing things for the tell me I did a good job was just not enough anymore. And that's when I really started to call into question, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Like, does this actually feel fulfilling to do? And the answer became no. And I kind of went on this like very kind of almost desperate search to find something that felt sustainable, felt fulfilling, didn't feel like it was going to exhaust me mentally, physically, and emotionally. And that's kind of how I found coaching and I found burnout and how I discovered what I do now. So I think that's an important way to frame the conversation is it's not just like about your lifestyle now. It's kind of about what informed you getting to this point because I think that's why burnout can like get its teeth into us and really like
Mhm.
grab a hold of us because this is like decades in the making.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm definitely excited to dive into that. And you took it back a little. I want to kind of take it back. Well, maybe not as far back as you went, but you talked about like grad school. And so,
Yeah.
how on earth did you go from being a research scientist to a burnout coach? Was that kind of was like grad school when you started realizing it and then becoming a research scientist kind of like solidified it all for you? But how did this happen?
Oh gosh. So I was gonna be Dr. Ellen. Like that was gonna be kind of the like badge of honor gold star that I was aiming for in grad
Okay.
school. I was getting my PhD. I was gonna be Dr. Ellen. But when I was in grad school, like I kind of followed the path where I did something because I was good at it, not necessarily because I liked it. And I kind of kept following the next logical step. And I hit a point in grad school where I was really, really struggling with fulfillment, essentially, was is what it boiled down to. But I don't think I recognized it as that initially. I was working myself to the bone. I was involved in like 80,000 different things because I kind of felt like I was doing things to try to fill this hole. And the hole
Mhm.
ultimately ended up being the fact that I was doing work that I just fundamentally didn't see myself doing for the rest of my life. I was pursuing this path that when I looked up the ladder at the other people who were doing the work I was doing, it's not that there was anything wrong with their lives. I just didn't want their lives. That wasn't like the future path that I saw for myself. So I kind of just started grasping at straws, trying to fill it, and I burned myself out. And so the connection between research scientist and burnout is a very loose one in a sense because like I got to doing the work I do now because I was having to deal with it myself. And so but I do think being a research scientist helped me in a lot of respects because when I started to look up what was wrong with me, what I needed to do to fix what I was experiencing, Google is maddeningly unhelpful. Like Google has like work less, sleep more, quit your job and I'm just like thank you. Thank you, Captain
Right.
Obvious. Like I didn't
Yeah.
already consider these possibilities. But what I was able to start doing is like start reading books by research scientists, start digging into journal articles. And because I came from the background I came from, I was actually, for the most part, able to understand what I was reading. I feel like I understand completely. Science is very inaccessible. Science is not written for lay people to understand. Like you might be able to understand like the little introductory abstract paragraph, but the rest of it,
Nope.
yeah, good luck. Because
I don't
honestly, most
understand that
scientists
either.
exactly. Like most scientists don't even understand when you like go to different fields. Most scientists struggle to understand. So like I was able to because my background is in immunology and your stress response is very interconnected with your immune response. I was able to understand a lot of what I was reading and from that I kind of built this toolkit for myself and I started sharing it with other people and that's kind of where I found coaching. I always joke that coaching threw a monkey wrench into my life because even when I started like fixing myself, I didn't do it with the intention of I'm going to learn these tools and become a coach. I just kind of became a coach. And where it really messed with me is I loved it. It was more fulfilling than anything I'd ever done in my life. And I have research publications. Like part of when you Google my name, like journal articles come up that I published in my former life. And like I just didn't find that as fulfilling as I found doing work and this work and coaching people and helping people in that respect. So that's kind of the loose connection between
Okay.
how do you become a burnout coach from being a
Go.
research scientist.
So, I mean, it kind of flows together because you said that the type of science you were studying was like stress management and things around that nature. And then
Loosely
you
related,
realize,
yeah.
yeah, loose. So it's kind of like loosely related because what I guess was it because of what you were studying that made you realize you were burnt out, or what was the moment when you realized that you was just like, I'm burnt out, I can't
Gosh.
do this anymore?
I'll be completely honest, I didn't use the word burnout at
Okay.
first. I didn't use that. It probably took me 2 or 3 years after the initial experience where I described myself as a burned out doctoral student. But
Mm,
initially, all I knew is I had a lot of the so in retrospect now, I know I was burned out, but at the time, I didn't actually connect the dots to burnout. Burnout wasn't something that came into my awareness until, like, I started my business around 2019, and that's when burnout really started to come into my awareness. What I was looking at is I was emotionally exhausted. I was tired all the time. I was doing all of these things, and I've always been, like, a very organized person. That's kind of one of my superpowers. But I despite all of the organization and despite all of the systems, I didn't feel like I was actually effective with my time. So it was a lot of, like, these tangentially related burnout symptoms that I was experiencing, and that's what I was, like, doing research on. That's what I was looking
oh,
into because, like, in the literature, the thing with burnout that's really interesting about burnout is burnout didn't actually have a medical definition wrapped around it until May 2019. Like,
oh
burnout, the
wow.
term, has been around since the '70s, but it hasn't actually been a part of, like, medical literature in the medical community since May 2019. That's when they established it. So back when I was doing this was in, like, 2014. So burnout wasn't necessarily used in the things that I was reading. It was chronic stress, it was emotional exhaustion, it was compassion fatigue. It was those kinds of terms that were being used, not burnout per se. So I think that's part
Mm,
of the reason I didn't connect the dots is because that's not the language they were using either.
right. Okay. That makes sense. And I mean, hearing what you just said, like, I think I may be burnt out about like how you have like because organization is my love language. I love organization. And but I feel like that a lot. I'm like, as organized as I am, I feel like I'm running in circles and I'm
Mhm,
just not like fully doing what I
mhm,
need to do. And it's frustrating because I have this whole plan in my head. I have everything like laid out and organized. And then I go sit down to do it. And it's like nothing makes sense, or you're just
yep,
too tired to do it, or
mhm,
I'm just staring at it and feeling like
mhm.
it needs to be reorganized again because it's not flowing, or I don't know if that's the sign of burnout, but hearing you say that I was like, "Oh,
It very
okay."
well could be. I think it's actually really funny because I joke all the time that I'm a procrastinator, but I kind of don't know if it's me. I'm not procrastinating per se. It's kind of like what you said. It's like despite the levels of organization, it doesn't feel effective. Something doesn't feel right about it. And so I'll reorganize it. I'll replan it as a way to try to fix whatever it is. But that's kind of something that's come to my awareness recently is firstly, I've changed a lot about how I plan because I'm constantly like in everything I do now, but like burnout prevention is in the back of my brain. So, like, I change how I plan. But let me actually break down for you because this I think will answer your question 100% on whether or not
Okay.
you are actually burned out and for the people that are listening. So, I always say that there's 4 different types of burnout. And now
Okay.
the medical community might not agree with me, but I break it down like this because I find it's easier for us to wrap our heads around and rationalize whether or not we are truly experiencing burnout when we break it down into types like this. I also really like it because the things you're going to do for one type of burnout are going to be very different than the things that you're going to do for another type of burnout. So typing it, I think, can be really helpful for us knowing what we're experiencing and what we need to do about it. So the
Okay.
types of burnout are physical, overwhelm, emotional, and boredom burnout. So the
Okay.
physical side of burnout is the one we tend to think of. I think it's the signs and symptoms that are most obvious and easiest for us to pay attention to. So physical burnout is like the depth of exhaustion where it feels like no amount of sleep or rest is ever going to be enough. Like we were joking at the beginning about the fact that you didn't get your extra 30 minutes of sleep this morning, and it feels like that extra 30 minutes of sleep was super, super valuable. I will say that a lot, like with physical burnout, it could be like you get 12 hours of sleep Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, and you still wake up Monday morning and it doesn't feel like you slept. That's that depth of exhaustion when we are in physical burnout. But I think that is often where people stop with physical burnout. That's where the like medical definition stops. They just say energy depletion. But
Mhm.
with the physical side of burnout, I think it can show up as so much more than that. It can actually, one of the biggest signs it can show up as is getting sick more frequently or having a lot of difficulty recovering from illness because our immune system and our stress response are very interconnected. And when we're really, really stressed, our immune system gets run down. So, like
Mm.
about a year ago, I took on way too many speaking engagements in way too short of a period of time. And what ended up happening is I experienced some physical burnout. I got sick like 4 times in the span of a couple months. Like I
Oh,
was just
wow.
jumping from one sickness to the next, to the next, to the next. That's another big sign of physical burnout because your body's trying to throw up a red flag that you need more rest and you're ignoring it. So your body's like, "All right, you're not going to rest. I'm going to make you rest."
I'm gonna make you
Uh,
rest. Yep.
yeah, so that's kind of the physical side, but it can also be changes in your basic self-care pattern. So like your energy levels, your sleep patterns, your appetite. That's actually a big one, especially for women. Your appetite is like almost a sign of health. If you get hungry, that's a sign that your metabolism is working correctly. If you're not getting hungry, that's a sign your metabolism is not working correctly. And that is typically associated with the fact that when we are in stress, that whole fight, flight, or freeze thing, our body literally like tamps down our appetite and our metabolism because it's sending blood to your extremities. It's preparing to fight or flee, you know? So it turns off your metabolism. So when you're not getting hungry, that's actually a sign of high cortisol and high stress.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of the physical side. Those are some of the things to look for there. The overwhelm side of burnout, I actually just recently added in a new sign of overwhelm burnout that I think is super relatable and happens to a lot of us when we're over in overwhelm burnout. So like the first one is the inability to turn off. Like you cannot turn off your brain. Like even when you're tired, your head hits the pillow and your brain's just going. You cannot fall asleep because you are just thinking of things. And what that can actually bleed into for a lot of us, this is the new thing that I've added, is we dream about our work. So,
Mhm.
like, you're dreaming about maybe the slide deck you're putting together, or you're dreaming about like your email inbox, or you're dreaming about, I've talked to a lot of architects that are like dreaming about their design software that they work in.
Oh, wow.
Dreaming about your work, overwhelm
Yeah.
burnout, 100% right there. I used to, when I actually don't dream about like coaching, but I tutor a little bit on the side and I'll end up
Uh,
dreaming about calculus. Super
oh,
fun.
interesting.
Super fun.
In-
Like, I will see derivatives and integrals in my brain while I'm sleeping, and I'm just like, "This is not peaceful." Oh,
Oh my gosh. So it's kind of hilarious that you say that. So the past 2 nights, and that's probably another reason I want to make sure 30 minutes of sleep today was because for like the past 2 or 3 nights, I will be tired, head on the pillow, like I'm like, okay, I'm gonna fall asleep. And I'm just wide awake and I
yeah,
cannot fall asleep for nothing in the world. I think this morning I finally fell asleep. Last time I looked at the clock, it was like 1:30. So I think that was when I finally like fell asleep around that time. But I also keep having dreams about my old job that I left last year. It's like the most randomish dreams that I keep having. And I'm like, why am I having dreams about being at this place? Like I left it, it's behind me. Why do I keep dreaming about it? And now you're saying this, and I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay.
yep,
Wow.
yep, and
Okay.
actually, pro tip, which might help you and help anybody who's listening who experiences the "I can't turn my brain off." I still do this. I keep a notebook next to my bed. Because that's one of the biggest ways that burnout shows up for me is the not being able to turn my brain off. I naturally just can't turn my brain off, especially like as soon as you go into entrepreneurship, like you're so on 24/7 that it's just
Right.
like your brain's constantly going. So I keep a notebook next to my bed. If I ever experience that, I just brain dump everything that's on my in my head into the notebook. And there's something about that when we write things down, our brain inherently feels like those things are more dealt with. So it's able to
Mhm.
let them go. I think that's part of the reason why that happens is we're coming up with, I mean, we inherently, just as humans, come up with ideas when we're kind of on that cusp between like consciousness and sleeping. That's a
Right.
naturally a time when it's part of the reason we come up with like ideas in the shower. That's naturally a time when
Me.
humans come up with ideas. Yep. So
Yes.
like it's overwhelm burnout, but it's also a very natural human thing that happens. So I keep a notebook next to my bed and I just brain dump all of the things into it. And then the next morning when I wake up and I go to work, I just grab the notebook and put all the stuff into like my systems. So
That's
that can be very, very helpful. Is literally just everything you're thinking of. Just write it down on a piece of
so
paper and just keep it next to your bed.
so I put it in my notes app because that's anyone who has listened to my show knows that my best ideas come either when I'm in the shower or at 2 o'clock a.m. when I should be sleeping, and instead I'm awake with 5,000 thoughts going through my head. So I'll write it in my notes app. And then, because also, even though I'm not asleep, I'm too lazy to actually get up and get out of the bed because I'm usually kind of at least semi comfortable. And then the
Yeah.
next day I'll put it in, like, I'll write it down because I
Yeah.
usually am a pen and paper girl. I'll write it down on like a piece of paper or something like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I feel
That's
like
interesting.
you're speaking to me here, Ellen. Keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the overwhelm side of burnout. And there's some other things that we could talk about with overwhelm burnout, but I think those are like the core of it. Emotional burnout, I always joke, is my favorite kind of burnout, but I'm a weirdo. So like I have a favorite kind of burnout. It's also one that it's just very near and dear to my heart because like I mentioned, this is what I was experiencing when I was in grad school. So the
Okay.
emotional side of burnout is the fulfillment side of burnout. And I think what I find so interesting about it is it's so multifaceted. So like the physical side ties back to the energy depletion part of burnout. The overwhelm side ties back to what the World Health Organization calls reduced professional efficacy. Um, so that's like the overwhelm side of burnout. With the emotional side of burnout, the World Health Organization calls this emotional exhaustion, but I think it's so much more than emotional exhaustion because it can be the result of a lack of boundaries, a lack of knowing your values. But I think the biggest things to look for with this one is first and foremost emotional reactivity. When you are quick to anger or quick to tears and you're typically like a very like emotionally regulated person, like it's not that you won't cry, it's just that you cry in appropriate situations. You cry when you're watching the sad movie, you cry when it's a safe space for you to cry, but suddenly those emotions start leaking out at inconvenient moments. I talked to a woman last week at a speaking engagement who was saying something along the lines of, this is very it's very appropriate that we're having this conversation today because I broke down in tears in my boss's office earlier this week. That's the kind of situation I'm talking about. Like when somebody asks you, how are you? And you start answering the question and you feel like the cracks in your emotional armor and the tears are starting to well up in your eyes and you're like, why the hell is this making me emotional right now? That's the kind of thing we're talking about here. So it can be quick to anger, it can be quick to tears. We just tend to be very emotionally reactive when we are in a state of emotional burnout. And then kind of as a side effect of that, and whether it's our doing or it's other people's reaction to our emotions, there tends to be social isolation that can result from that. So maybe you go from having, like when I was in grad school, I was the social chair of my graduate department. And then I went from that to just like being a hermit and never wanting to hang out with people. So it's like
No one
those
talks
big
to
kind
me.
of personality swings. That's where the social isolation can come in. And it's either because we don't want to burden other people with the emotions we're experiencing, or maybe it's because they're not comfortable with our tears, or we've snapped at them and we've kind of driven them away. Like sometimes people will isolate themselves from us, or we can isolate ourselves from people. So it can kind of go both ways. And then what it can also show up as, and I always caveat with this one, especially because I got an email about this the other day. Caveat with this one, you don't necessarily have to have all of the signs of each of these. It might just be certain of the signs that are really, really sticking out to you. But this one can also show up as apathy, disinterest, negativity, or pessimism. So
Mm.
I think that's a big sign with high achievers in particular, because high achievers are inherently very driven, very self motivated, very engaged in work in particular. And then when you see a shift to not caring in a high achiever, that's a big red flag. So that's
Okay.
kind of the emotional side of burnout. And then boredom burnout is always the one that surprises people, but this one's an offshoot of emotional burnout. There's a lot of aspects of boredom burnout that are similar to emotional burnout, but I separate them because I think the causality is different. With emotional burnout, it's fundamentally about a lack of fulfillment. With boredom burnout, it's fundamentally about like a lack of challenge and a lack of interest in what you're doing. Like with boredom burnout, you feel like you just don't care. You're going through the motions day in and day out. That's really what boredom burnout shows up as. So it's kind of, instead of having too much stress, too much stuff on your plate, with boredom burnout, it's almost like you don't have enough.
Mm. Okay.
So those are our four types of burnout. And I'm curious, since you were like, I'm wondering if I'm burned out, like, did you see yourself in some of those?
Yes, I did. I saw myself, and I think pretty much all of them except for boredom,
That's what usually
emotional.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just an emotional wreck. I will cry at the drop of a dime. I broke down crying the other day. I don't know. Oh, I know what it was. So we had a dog. She passed away in April of 2023. And she was a Yorkie. And I mean, like, lately Yorkie videos have been popping up all the time on my Facebook news feed. I'm like perfectly fine with them. I look at them, I'm laughing. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what Allie used to do. Like, haha. And I don't know if it was just everything that was going on with me that week or what it was, but I didn't even click on the video. I just saw like the little clip of like the Yorkie running, however it does before you like pull up. And I just like broke down crying, like just ugly crying, tears, everything. And I had to do an Instagram live in like 15 minutes. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I gotta
You're
do
like,
this
pull it
Instagram live.
together.
Yeah, I'm like pulling together, but at the same time, I'm over here like crying about the dog and like looking at her picture. And I'm like, I gotta do this live. And I was just like, I was all over the place. And so, but I've always been like an emotional crier though. I mean, if I'm happy, I'm angry,
I am
like
too, yeah.
yeah, like whatever it is. I even remember the job that I was telling you about before I left there. One day I went in my boss's office and I was really pissed off about a situation. I was like, I'm not crying because I'm sad or I'm sad. I'm like, I'm crying because I'm pissed off and I'm mad and I can't help it. And I hate that I cry when I'm mad. But yeah, I think I've definitely experienced all of those. I can sleep for 12 hours and still be tired. I definitely, not
Yeah.
falling asleep at night. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you,
And it can show up that way. I think this is when I used to explain these, I never really explained to people that yes, you can have multiple types of burnout simultaneously. Like when I was in graduate school, for me, one of the other things with emotional burnout is that you can have an excess of numbing behaviors. Like when you see an uptick in numbing behaviors, which something is a numbing behavior when we're using it as an escaping tactic. That's ultimately what it boils down to. And I think we often think of like drinking or overeating or binge watching shitty reality TV shows and stuff like that. Like those are absolutely numbing behaviors. But I think what we also underestimate as being numbing behaviors are those like productive things that we do. Like
mm,
exercise can be a numbing behavior. I would say for the vast majority of the human population it isn't, but it can be a numbing behavior. Work, I think, is actually one of the most common things we use that is a seen as very productive, but is ultimately can be a numbing behavior. And when I was in grad school, I was fundamentally unfulfilled by the path I was on, but I didn't want to acknowledge it because at that point I kind of had so much sunk cost and sunk time and sunk effort into pursuing that path that I didn't really want to admit that I didn't like the path that I was on. So
mm,
I numbed by working. I got involved in like 80,000 things, like from work related things to not work related things. Like I was in a sketch comedy group, I did science communication. I started a side business when I was in grad school while I was doing a PhD and a master's degree simultaneously. Like I just got involved in a lot of things. Like I didn't want not busy time on my schedule,
right.
basically, is I think it would have boiled down to. So as a result of that, I kind of got into overwhelm burnout. Like there was too much going on. I was starting to dream about work and dream about these things I was involved in. I was starting to, I couldn't turn my brain off at night, but I didn't do anything about that either. So I was kind of hustling and working and trying to stay on top of all of these things that I was involved in. And I experienced physical burnout. So I hit the first three, just like you were talking about when I was in grad school. But I think the thing that we need to think about with this is the issue wasn't physical burnout. Physical burnout resulted from overwhelm burnout, but the issue wasn't overwhelm burnout either. Overwhelm resulted from emotional burnout. So there's usually one type of burnout that is the domino that toppled the rest. So if you
Mm,
are experiencing multiple types of burnout, what's really important, and I always say self awareness is a superpower when it comes to burnout. And I think a lot of high achievers think it's kind of like woo woo and touchy feely. Nah, it's just you're gathering data from your life.
right.
That's what self awareness is it's just data gathering. You're looking at the data points and interpreting them for what they mean. And when we can have that kind of an approach to self awareness that is data driven and objective and non judgmental, we're able to look at our life and say, you know what? It's not this. It's not this. It's actually this type of burnout that is creating the other types of burnout in my life. And then that's the type of burnout we need.
Okay. Wow. Thanks, Ellen. That was very educational. And I've never heard burnout explained like that or in such
You're
depth.
the
So I
second
really,
person to say that to me.
like your scientific background like that really helped. And I even love how you said it's like you're collecting data about yourself because so often we don't analyze ourselves and you
Mhm.
need to analyze or evaluate yourself just to see where you're at and where you want to go, where you want to be and what you need to change in order to
Exactly.
get there. So I think that was like a perfect correlation and that put it together very nicely.
Yeah.
So
See, the
thank
nerdy
you.
scientist is still in there. She's just buried a little bit more than she
It's okay. We're pulling her out today. We're pulling her out today. So are you currently burnt out?
I love it when people ask me this question. Actually, no. Currently, I'm not burned out. A year ago, if you'd asked me that, 100% yes.
Okay.
That was when I was in, I think this is the misconception that a lot of people have. I work with high achievers in particular because I feel like high achievers have natural tendencies that create burnout in their lives. I think our tendency is to do too much, to push ourselves too hard. I am 1,000% that person. I have seen burnout coaches online where they're like, oh, I have to deliberately get myself back into a point of overwhelm so that I can remember what it's like to be my clients. I am not that burnout coach. Like burnout is still it's very near and dear to me because it's always something that I could fall back into if I'm not careful. But I think what I've started to realize is, and this is a little bit controversial, I guess it's a lot of bit controversial. I believe burnout is a choice. And not
Mhm.
that we want to be burned out. I don't think anybody chooses burnout. But why I say that is because I think burnout is the result of our choices. I'm a big believer that overwork and burnout are not synonymous. I think you can work a ton and not be burned out so long as you are being strategic about refilling yourself. You are being strategic about making sure that you have sources, like multiple sources of fulfillment in your life. That you are being strategic with how you're approaching self-care. I think we can, I joke that I summered really hard this year. Like I didn't really work a ton this summer. I
Right.
just enjoyed summer because it's like the only time it's actually nice living in the Seattle area, which is where I live. So I summered really hard and then I've been working my absolute butt off the last few months and I don't feel burned out at all. I actually feel a very good, I don't like the word balance, but I do feel a good sense of sustainability in my life.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
sustain this sort of, 3 months light, 3 months heavy, 3 months light. I can sustain that. That feels good to me actually because I'm in kind of grind mode right now. I'm focused, I'm motivated. I have a lot of goals I'm working toward and it doesn't feel heavy. I think it's always important to ask yourself when you're a high achiever, are you working from a place of purpose or are you working from a place of hustle? And I think I'm working from a place of purpose right now. I feels very aligned and I'm taking care of myself in the process. So I think that's how we stave off the burnout in those moments of and when we're working a lot.
Mhm. And no, I don't think it's controversial because it kind of goes back to what you said earlier about how, when you were in grad school, that you were joining all of these things because you felt like you weren't fulfilled. And so I think we make ourselves overwhelmed in that aspect because we don't feel fulfilled in what it is that we're doing. So we go out and we try different little things to see how that can help us and fulfill us. And then that's when you start to get overwhelmed because now you're spreading yourself too thin, but you don't necessarily want to quit because you don't want to feel like a quitter and you did
Yep,
all this to feel fulfilled. And now you're just kind of, it's like a trickling ripple
exactly.
effect here. And it's kind of not, it's not helping you accomplish what it was that you were trying to do. So, yeah.
Exactly, exactly, and
Yeah.
you actually touched on something I think is perhaps one of the reasons why I've gotten to the place in my life where I can have seasons like this where I'm working really hard and it doesn't feel like burnout in any way, shape, or form, and it's because, like, for example, I have the framework, which I'm in the process of changing the name of because right now it's called the Sustainable Success Framework, and it's a mouthful, and I don't
Yeah.
really like how it sounds to say, but the gist of that is I think we need three things to prevent burnout. I think we need sustainable systems. So we need systems in our life, whether you're an entrepreneur or not. You need systems in your life that are sustainable in the sense that they don't take a whole bunch of work for you to maintain, but they are also sustainable in the sense that they help you balance what you have on your plate. Like your systems should support and help wrangle the chaos in your life. Like if they're not doing that, they are not serving you in the way that they could. Like our system should take stuff off of our mental plate. Our system should take away manual work and kind of us having to do mental gymnastics day in and day out. That's why I've changed a lot about how I plan. Like I used to sit down in the morning and have no idea what I was working on that day. Or I would have like days like today where I'm hopping from one thing to the next to the next. Tuesdays are a lot of calls for me. I do a lot of calls on Tuesday, and that's exactly how today is in my calendar. because we're recording on a Tuesday, everybody. Like I have a lot of calls in my calendar today, and I used to not plan for that when I created my to-dos and my schedule, and now I do. So that's like a way in which my systems have started to support me instead of, create more chaos in my life. So
Yeah.
that's like the first thing that we really need is our systems need to be a support system, not something that's extra work for us. And then the second piece is we need to have sustainable self-care. And I actually think this is a way, I don't know if it's an in my 30s thing or what, but like this is a way self-care has changed so much for me since I started doing this work, even because I think for a lot of high achievers and for a lot of humans and a lot of women in general, we tend to approach self-care as like this massive checklist of things that we have to do every day. And if we're not doing these things every day, then we suck and we're not actually taking care of ourselves. That's not how self-care should be.
Nope.
Self-care should, yes, sustain everything that you do, should give you energy, should fill your cup. Absolutely. But self-care should also, in and of itself, be sustainable. If your self-care feels like a to-do list, it is not self-care anymore. It's an obligation.
I
So
agree.
shifting that approach to how you're thinking about self-care can also really help prevent burnout. Like I'm doing 75 hard right now, which is like that mental challenge where you work out twice a day. But my
Okay.
working out twice a day, because fun fact, I'm on my period right now. So like my working out twice a day and last week has been I go for a walk and then I'm usually doing yoga or some form of mobility or some form of stretching. I know my body's screaming, "Hey, we have less energy right now." So I'm not about to force myself to go for my walk and then go throw around weights for 45 minutes in a gym. That's going to do the opposite of what I want self-care to do. That's going to drain me. That's not going to fill me back up. So what shifts can you make about how you're approaching self-care that makes it more sustainable? And then the last pillar is sustainable mindset. And I actually think this ties back to something that you just said a second ago, which is what got me on this train of thought. You said a second ago something along the lines of we don't give ourselves permission to quit. I actually think that's one of the lies a lot of us have been taught over the course of our last however many years on this planet, that quitting is somehow bad. I actually think quitting can be a very strategic decision. And maybe I'm biased because I quit grad school. I was going to be Dr. Ellyn. I dropped out of grad school. But I think quitting can be very empowering. Quitting, especially when it comes from a data-driven place, when quitting comes from a
Right.
data-driven place, you are making a decision not on impulse, not even necessarily on like overly emotional decisions. When you are making a decision from a strategic, data-driven place, quitting can absolutely be the right move. I actually don't think, as much as my parents hated when I dropped out of grad school, like I don't think anybody in my family would disagree with the evaluation that that's probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. So it's like changing your relationship with quitting, changing your relationship with boundaries. A lot of us think of boundaries as being some sort of a bad word, and realizing that it's not, and that boundaries actually help keep you in your life. They don't necessarily separate you from your life. Changing your relationship with boundaries, changing your relationship and your definition of success. Like so many of us, myself included, this is what happened to me in grad school. The things that we are chasing, the definition of success that we are chasing is the reason we're burned out. We're chasing another promotion. We're chasing another bonus. We're chasing getting a bigger house that we don't actually need, but it just feels like the next logical step in our life. I downsized. I moved from a one bedroom, apartment into a 500 square foot studio. Like literally what you can see on the camera right now is basically my whole apartment. Like
Okay.
I so sometimes we chase these things that don't actually feel like success to us. And then we wonder why the moves that we've made in our life don't feel good. And that's ultimately what it comes back to, is you're chasing success that isn't yours. So these are
Mm.
all ways in which we can create a sustainable mindset, is by changing our relationship with some of these things, getting very, very clear on what are my core values. Spoiler alert and subtle plug, I have a values mini course on the website if anybody needs to figure out what their values are.
I love it.
But like that, I actually think one of the best moves you can do for yourself when it comes to emotional burnout and preventing emotional burnout, get very, very clear on what your values are and tie everything you do back to those.
Okay. I love that. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that and talking about the four types of burnout and the things that we can do to prevent burnout. And then I also love what you just said here, that you're chasing success that isn't yours, because so often I think, that is what we do. Like you feel like, okay, I had this 1-bedroom apartment, but now I need to go up to a 3-bedroom apartment, or I need to buy a house, or, whatever the case may be. And of course, if that's what your needs are, then yes. But if you're just doing it
Yeah.
because you feel like that's the next thing, then no, like that may not be the
Yeah.
next thing. Downsizing may be it for you. So I love how you said that and how you put that. So thank you. And before we go, can you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Oh, heck yeah, which you're gonna be on. So everybody should come over
Yay!
and listen to the podcast. Yeah, so my podcast is called the Burnout Proof Podcast. We talk about God, everything burnout related. We talk about everything from really like a lot of the 3 pillars that I just talked about. We talk a lot about self-care, we talk a lot about mindset, we talk a lot about systems, because I'm a big believer that systems are the first step. Like when we have create concrete systems in our life, it frees us up to do like the life giving stuff. So we talk a lot about systems, changing the way you plan, changing the way you store information in your world, all of that kind of stuff. And then once a month, I have a guest come on the podcast where we talk about their area of expertise and their zone of genius and how that can benefit us from a burnout prevention perspective as well. So Burnout Proof is the name of the podcast. And yeah, it's everywhere you can listen to podcasts is where you can find it.
Where you can find it. And I will definitely link it in the show notes. And as Ellyn said, I am going to be on her show. That is what we are recording for tomorrow, which is actually quite funny because we're recording for my show on a Tuesday, but my show airs on Wednesday and her show airs on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Recording for
Yeah,
her
so
show on
actually,
Wednesday. So
yeah, your episode will already be out by the time this
yes,
comes out. So if you want to hear Angel's side of things, come on over to the Burnout Proof podcast and
yes,
listen to your story. Doing a nice little, very well coordinated swap happening here right now.
yes. We planned this very well. See, those are our systems in place there, everyone. That we planned this and
Exactly.
we thought about this. So, well, Ellyn, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share before we go? Oh, and
I
how
think
can
the
everyone
only other
find you too?
Yeah, that's what I was going to add. The only other thing
Okay.
I would share is just if you want more, if you want to learn more, I feel like one of the biggest things for a lot of us is knowing when we are in burnout. And I think that maybe one thing I would add before I add where you can find me is I think the biggest thing a lot of us do wrong when it comes to burnout prevention is we wait too long to do something. You do not want to wait until you're at like crash and burn. I need a life raft because I'm drowning in my life right now. Don't wait until that point to take action on burnout. I think one of the best things we can do when it comes to burnout prevention is if you saw yourself in a lot of what we talked about today, then I would say now is the time to do something to change it. We need to start thinking about burnout management and burnout prevention as more of a proactive and a preventative solution. You don't want to wait until you're at that at wit's end point because you're not going to have the capacity to do anything and to make any changes to your life when you're at that point. You're going to want to make changes to your life now. And that's definitely a hard thing to kind of shift because a lot of us usually wait until the problem's like in our face to do something about it. Don't do that with burnout. I'm telling you right now, after seeing this and so many clients, that's the point you don't want to wait for. Take action now, be preventative and proactive about it. And then that's really how we start to build a lifestyle that is, as I said for the name of the podcast, Burnout. So that's the one little tidbit that I'll add. And in terms of where you can find me, I'm at Coach Ellyn everywhere. My website is coachellyn.com. I'm at Coach Ellyn on Instagram. And just to mess you up, my name is spelled weird. So it's Ellyn, Coach Ellyn on Instagram, on basically all social media websites. I'll be at Coach.
And I will link that in the show notes as well, everyone, so that you can make sure that you are finding the correct Coach Ellyn when you go
Yeah.
look. So, yes.
Yeah.
Well, Ellyn, thank you so much. It has been so much fun chatting with you today, and I will be chatting with you again tomorrow. So enjoy
Yes, you
the rest
will.
of your day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. All right, everyone. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Y'all know I run on coffee, and so does the Modco podcast. If you would like to caffeinate the show, you can head over to buymeacoffee.com/the Modco podcast. There's an option for one-time support or monthly support. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the episode and that you were able to gain something from it. Talk to you next time.